The Coming Century of Commonism, The Beauty and the Beast of Global Governance with Dr. Philip Boehm. I'm here with Dr. Boehm, and Dr. Boehm, I just appreciate your writing and your research, and as my professor, can you just tell me about this book, why you wrote it, and why it's important?
I'll be glad to. I was teaching international politics at Regent University in Virginia, and when I was talking about international politics, I realized there was a fundamental shift in terms of worldview, that the thinkers and the politicians were moving from an international organization, world of international politics, to world politics, and ultimately to a global politics and global order. So I began to realize that we were moving beyond communism with a U, and beyond atheist communism, and even beyond liberal democracy in the Western world, toward a new synthesis, what I called commonism. And especially I wanted to deal with the new spirit behind this commonism. And I began to realize politically that there were proponents to move away from the world of international organizations, international relations between nation states. We call that the stage of independence of nation states with their own national sovereignty, to an interdependence, first maybe the economic interdependence, like say through NAFTA or the European Economic Community are good examples of economic interdependence, but ultimately moving toward political interdependence, let alone political integration. So we're moving from international politics to world politics to global politics and a global order. Even on the continental level, we talk about, in the continents, the Americas, but even the continents were integrated into a much more global regional organization, and that the United Nations would move from an international organization of nation states to a much more politically powerful organization, and ultimately transform the United Nations into a organization of global governance, dealing with all issues, a very integrated agenda of economic, political, and cultural, social issues. And as well as on the regional level, as I mentioned, that even the Americas, the African Union would be integrated into a global organization. So I began to realize that shift, and that it also was promoting an agenda not of democracy, but more of a democratism. It talks about democracy, but really wants to move beyond liberal political democracy, which instead of valuing democracy as a liberal democratic polity, they began to promote democratism and impose democracy in all spheres, the political, economic, social, as well as the cultural, which is the ideology of not just a political principle of equality, but the ideology of egalitarianism in all spheres. And that's, for example, manifested in terms of the issue of imposing the principle of equality in marital relations, that you have the agenda of same-sex unions to the points of an LBJ agenda, let alone to even say denying the diversity between male and female. So it's a democratism, and it's also in that sense a totalitarian, because it wants to impose that kind of an agenda, this global integration, this democratism on all nations and all peoples. So we're moving away from nation states to supposedly an agenda of peoples and nations as a global people. And Canada is a beautiful example. That even the current Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, and I wrote about this already in the 1980s, that Justin Trudeau has now said that Canada is no longer really an independent or interdependent nation state that wants to be known as a global nation. It's an integral part of this global agenda, and Canada is willing to adjust to that reality. And I wrote this in 1890s, and that book was published in 1992. And look what's happened in 2017, when Trudeau has actually begun to use the language I described already, what was happening in Canada in the 1990s. So I'm very concerned that peoples and nations are losing their independence, but more specifically,